Hey, everybody. Welcome to the American Wine Journey podcast number 3. This one is about sustainability. In the first podcast, we talked about how wine got to America, what it did from there, what grapes were featured. So go back and look at those if you want to see any of that. I'm Gary Moore with the... you ready for this? Yeah. Journey More Often. I'm Gary Moore with Journey More Often. We have with us...
Ben Cody here with American Wine Journey and 1723 Vineyards.
Yeah. So again, we're going to talk to you about sustainability. People think about sustainability in different ways, and it's important to understand. Okay, so what does that mean to a vineyard? You can think about, okay, sustainability. I just want to keep growing grapes, but there's different ways to go about that. So let's dive right in.
Yeah, it's funny that there's no common, accepted definition of sustainability, and honestly, the term probably gets misused a little bit. The way I think about it is this. Sarah and I, my wife, are both fifth-generation farmers, and families have been farming the same ground in Oklahoma and Indiana for well over 100 years. And the way I look at sustainability is you're able to do that on that same piece of ground, and that piece of ground is better than what it was 100 years ago. That's sustainability to me.
The kind of the philosophy, you leave it better than when you got there.
That's right.
Okay. All right. So that is your definition of sustainability, so to speak. And how does that work? How do you leave the land better? How does that, translate?
Well, I think first and foremost is soil health. That's a thing, ironically, in the viticulture's a fancy word for saying that's how, the form of agriculture that's associated with growing grapes. And there's been a lot of emphasis on soil health. For years and years, it was always about how lean could you make the soil and how poor could you make the soil, because there was this conception that, hey, if the vine suffered a lot, somehow the fruit would be better. And the reality is, if that soil's not healthy, that vine's going to die. It's going to suffer to the point where it will die.
There is a very strange misconception out there, because you have great wines growing in like pebbles.
Yeah,
you have great wines growing in like sand.
Sure.
And so everybody thinks, well, the idea is to starve the vine, and that's not exactly how that works.
It isn't. If you go back in history, of course, if you've watched the other podcasts that we've done, y'all, the listeners, know that Gary and I are both into history in a big way. The reason a lot of those historic vineyards, or vineyards that have been farmed for several hundred, if not a few thousand years, they're on those lean sites, is because they had to have the more fertile ground for grain, or some form of perhaps vegetables, because it was so hard to feed people back then. I mean, today we live in this world where we're so productive in terms of agriculture, especially here in America. You don't have to worry about it. But then they had the poorer soils. Well, we'll put the bonus crop, which was basically grapes or wine, on that. And vines can do pretty well in rocky soils, but
they're pretty hardy.
You can only go so far with that.
Well, that's exactly right. And, it's funny because, and it's true in this country, everybody thinks, oh, well, anything grows anywhere. And it's not quite true, because they don't realize you can't grow certain things in certain places. And the breadbasket's named the breadbasket for a reason. And, a lot of the grains grow really, really well in the Midwest. So, but when you're looking at here, how do you, I mean, we didn't even know grapes could grow this well until recently. So, we talked about that in episode 2. I mean, grapes are, they grow up in the Finger Lakes, where they get a lot of snow, and we get snow here as well. So it's not like, we're void of adverse weather. But, when you're talking about soil, let's dive into that a little bit, because, people think, oh, well, you've got to use insecticides, you've got to use pesticides, you've got to use herbicides, you've got all the sides, if you will.
Yeah.
And they think, oh, well, you just got to throw a lot. And this is people's misconception of farming in general, is that, all farmers just throw a lot of chemicals to the ground. And that's actually not true either, because what people don't realize is that the farmer wants to get the greatest yield. There's no doubt about that. But the greatest yield is not gotten from over over chemicalizing, if I can
for sure.
literally
Yeah.
term a phrase, you putting too many chemicals on the soil,
Yeah.
is not good for any crop.
I mean, it's usually a pretty good sign you're growing the wrong thing in the wrong place. If you have to, now,
Yeah.
there's a place for all that stuff, for sure. I mean, there are legitimate reasons, and we use those sides here too. Everybody does, in every wine growing region in the world. But when you get I won't name the wine region, but I was with a guy from Cornell was talking about a wine region. He says, when we're having to spray this stuff 13 times a year, like that's too many, and
That's a lot,
that's
actually.
a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot.
But a lot of it's timing too with sprays. So
Well-
much of it is timing it properly. And there's been a big movement in the industry over to, well, hey, we're going to go organic. And when you talk about sprays, that's a recipe for spraying a lot more because what you're left with there, the two primary diseases that we deal with from a vineyard perspective are downy and powdery mildew, and sulfur is the organic spray for powdery mildew, and we use that a lot here. It's actually pretty effective. Copper is the organic spray for downy mildew, and that is only moderately effective. So you're spraying a lot more. And by the way, you're burning a lot more diesel fuel putting that spray out. But here's the crazy thing: that copper is a heavy metal, never leaves the ground. There's vineyards in Bordeaux that literally have 400 times the legal limit of copper in their soil. Now they claim they're organic, but does that sound like sustainable farming to you?
It sounds like in 100 years they'll be mining the surface of the ground for copper.
We have uninitiated folks. Are you organic? Like, no, and I never would be, because that would, you talk about leaving the land in a better place than what it was before you got here. Putting tons of copper in the soil, not a great plan for leaving it in a better place than what you were.
And that and that begs to ask the question what the definition of organic is. What is organic? If hey, copper is natural. It's found in nature, so it's kind of organic. So you could
exactly
pseudo claim you're an organic.
Oh no, it's not pseudo. You can. In fact, you'd have to go that route, and so
it's not a chemical. It's not it's not something that the runoff could possibly kill. Well, you know where I'm going with that.
Yeah, for sure.
But then you've got so then you've got definitions of organic.
Yeah.
When we were over in France in the Châteauneuf-du-Pape region, we discovered a lot of them were biodynamique.
Yeah.
And so, they were like, hey, and they announced that to you.
Yeah.
But as soon as they found out you were from the U.S., they announced that because, it's the new organic.
Yeah.
It's the next level organic. And they're very quick to explain what that means. And it is fascinating. Don't get me wrong. It's incredibly fascinating. And it actually does have a lot of value to be biodynamic.
It is. What's interesting that they can do that there because they really of all the diseases it's so dry there that they only deal with powdery mildew, which you can spray with the sulfur. But back to sustainability. Here's the crazy thing. I've spent quite a bit of time down there too, and they're running out of water. And you can't. Those grapes aren't going to grow with that water. So it gets the. I think the industry has gotten way too legalistic about the definition. Everybody says, "Well, I'm organic, so I'm sustainable." Like, well, you're growing grapes in a region where let's take Napa, where the people that are living out there can't get well water anymore because the aquifers have been deleted to the point where there's not enough water for people to drink because they're having to put that on those grapevines. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that wine, but again, does that sound sustainable to you when you put your neighbors when your neighbor's well run dry? That's not sustainable. So I think as an industry and as consumers, you got to back up and look at the bigger picture versus the legalistic definition of this stuff and say, hey, is this something we can continue to do this way for 100 years or 150 years or 200 years? And will this place be better than it is today? And are we doing it in a way that doesn't deplete the environment of a bunch of natural resources?
Exactly. So when you look at it, you have to make sure that we're not in a destructive mode. So to speak.
Exactly. I'm not robbing my neighbor of water.
It's hard.
I'm not putting copper in the soil. And all sorts of stuff like that.
Unfortunately, California is very unique in that because they do struggle. They struggle with a water scenario where they've got a lot of people.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of draw for water. So they've got a lot of, potential use, and therefore they have to do that with their water. And and that, so how do you?
Well, that gets back to the bigger picture. Like we really work really hard to get along with everybody here, and so much of that is fit in with your neighborhood and
Right.
the people around you. And yeah, you can argue, well, it'd been just fine to grow all those grapes out in California until all the people moved in with it. I mean, you could argue, well,
Right.
one was here first or the other, whatever, right? But the situation's not sustainable.
It exists, yeah, and it isn't. Yeah,
that's one of the things I'm really proud of here in Chester County, how much open space that we as taxpayers have preserved through our tax dollars.
Especially in Franklin Township.
Especially here in Franklin
Township. Kudos to Franklin Township right now, because they have, I don't know what system they have in place, but they have succeeded in preserving thousands of acres just in Franklin Township.
Yeah, and just think about all all the goodness. I mean, that we're on preserved ground right here, and we've created an environment with 30-something acres of green, vines, trees. Those
things that people like to look at.
Yeah, exactly.
Versus
talk about unsustainable would have been 160 townhouses.
Which is what it. Yeah, I saw those plans, by the way.
Yeah, what was going in on this property before we put in a vineyard. So I think it's all about balance, right? It's just it's all about finding the balance between people and creating a true ecosystem where everybody is getting benefit. The environment. The environment gets benefit from the taxpayers. The taxpayers are getting benefit from the environment. It's all
right. No, really it's true. It's
really
true.
Good. Like the bird that's on the back of the cow that eats the flies off the cow's back.
If you've ever seen
it, symbiotic.
Yeah,
that's the word I was looking for. We have to strive for a very symbiotic relationship.
Exactly. How do we allow people to still inhabit the area, but not take it over to the point where you're losing literal culture, and farming is a culture in and of itself. And what a lot of people don't realize, that in this area in particular, back in the 80s, it was still an agrarian culture.
Yeah.
So in, what's that, 40 years?
Yeah.
In 40 years, it flipped.
Yeah.
To a bedroom community versus agrarian. Now in that said, when you look at it, there's still a lot of preserved land.
Very much.
And we've we've personally been benefits of that, because we have in front of us, we have somebody who dedicated their farm, so that's a privately owned farm, and they are preserved, so they don't develop anymore. And on the one side to the right, we've got 62 acres that was during COVID. It's actually 62 acres and also 29 acres during COVID that was purchased by the Franklin Township, council, and in back of us is the the open space for a subdivision. So we're literally surrounded by 150 acres of open space, and we love that part. And we moved in knowing that was potential, but we also moved in knowing that the 29 acre and the 62 acre parcels could have been developed.
Yeah,
we did know that, and it turns out that they weren't developed. And so I think you're right. I think open space and acknowledging the need for, and this is if there's such a thing, there's clean farming. I don't know. Do you spread pig manure ever?
Well, again,
you have to spread manure at some point. I would guess.
Our soils are we're in such a rich biodynamic environment,
and on top of the hill too.
That honestly our organic matter here is is around 5 to 6%, which is really it's a lot. So honestly, we never have
some nice topsoil.
But hey, but back to what I was saying earlier, some manure is good, but
you can over manure.
Well, I was going to say, folks don't know here, but just because they've had issues with groundwater in the past, we're considered a public water source here. We have to have our water tested every quarter to make sure that chloroform bacteria hasn't seeped into the groundwater, and that is a huge issue in Chester County because so much manure has been used. That's what I'm saying. Sustainability, you've got to look at the big picture.
Right.
Oh, you're not using phosphorus based what do you call it?
Chemicals.
Yeah.
Let's just say
but you said, I'm putting out manure, but you're poisoning the groundwater as you do it. If you do
so what's in the manure? That's another thing that people
bacteria.
There's a lot in the
chloroform bacteria.
More than chloroform bacteria.
So don't get me wrong. I mean, that's the way to go. But anything can be overdone, and if you overdo anything, it becomes unsustainable. You can't put that much manure out there without messing up somebody's well.
Right. And so when it was kind of interesting, because when we lived in West Grove, there was we'd go up we'd go out one road, north to 41, and there was this one farm on both sides of the road. It was the same farm on both sides of the road, and once a year they'd spread manure. And when you're riding through, there's a lot of odor going on there.
Well,
but that was once a year that they did that.
That's all.
And so
all well
they
and
took the time to make it so that it didn't happen too often. And they knew what they could spread and how much they could spread, because what a lot of people do, you just dump it and spread it. No, they figure out how much they need on there. They do testing. The agriculture department in Pennsylvania, they do testing on soils for you if you want. And so they determined whether or not, okay, so you're low on nitrogen here. This field over here, you're a little higher, so you don't need any nitrogen. So, when they do that, and obviously people don't realize, but, manure does have nitrogen in it as well. And
well, one of the reasons we can really in having a vineyard around here, you probably, if you've got the right farming practices, you honestly would probably never need to do it, because for example, when we hedge the vines, and even when we prune the vines, one of the practices we have here is we'll go through there and chop up all that plant material, and that goes right back into
carbon
the soil.
source right to the soil.
The only thing that we're ever taking out of the soil is a small amount of potassium. Literally, if you think about it, everything else goes back in because it was a part of a plant, and that plant goes right back into the ground. And the potassium here is so incredibly high that I don't think you could ever deplete it. Growing grapes. So it's really, again, it gets back to sustainable. We don't have to fertilize here because, again, we chop everything up. And again, we're dealing with a lot of the reason a lot of those, vineyards do have to fertilize in drier climates is because it's not enough water. So they need to have the water that the plant takes up from the ground be so concentrated in terms of nutrients so that the vine gets enough that they have to do that. But again, you got to find a place where it's all in balance, and
and it's difficult because then you also have in like some countries, when we were in Spain, there was one winery that they were talking about. There was a case. It wasn't the year that we were there, but I think it was the year before or 2 years before, and they said they were having difficulty because in order to maintain the label that goes on the bottle, now you're talking about, okay, my wine's worth a lot more with the label on the bottle. But in order to maintain the label, they told you when it was okay to irrigate. And this particular year, they had a drought. And so there was like no water. The plants were like, they weren't actually watching their plants die on the vine, but it was pretty close. And so they were screaming at the authorities saying, hey, listen, we need to give it a little bit of water at least, keep the plants alive so that we can have some sort of yield at the end of the year. And, that's when people don't realize that, hey, just for the sake of selling that bottle for another $5 each, you have to be governed by the authorities that tell you, okay, now you can water.
Yeah, that's right. And in France, it's just been in the last few years they've allowed any irrigation. Again, if you're going to maintain a certain label. But the crazy thing is when you talk to the vignerons, they're like, well, there's not enough water here to water with, so it doesn't. So
it doesn't really matter.
It's an interesting. The industry's going through a lot of changes just because the climate's changing too, and. I think in the end we're all really adaptable people, and we'll figure it out. Jim Law down at Linden Vineyards in Virginia, who's kind of a pioneer of East Coast grape growing and winemaking, he says, we can adapt to about anything. We just kind of need to know what we're adapting to. Now that's we've had crazy. The weather swings are just so crazy season to season, and even within season, it's just we're shooting for a moving target. So. But that's all part of the fun. If you can't deal with that, you can't deal with that, then you shouldn't be in agriculture.
And that's farming in general. Farming. There's so much that changes from one year to the next, sometimes drastically from one year to the next. 1 year you might, might never get below 40 1 year. And then the next year, it's just 20 degrees for 4 weeks straight, that's the kind of area that we're in here. They're looking at, I talked to some folks in southern France, not quite South France, not on the Mediterranean, but a little bit above that. They have in the Bordeaux region, for instance, they near Dijon, they have these. The problem is that the weather is now starting to move north. So it's getting warmer and warmer, and that's a different grape almost, and so now they're forced with, okay, so do I swap out my vines, and graft in new grapes because what people don't realize, the vine may be 100 years old at the base.
Sure.
The vine may be there, but it may have been regrafted like three or four times in that time period.
Can be, yeah.
And people don't realize, well, wait, the vine is, the vine may be that old, but the key is, and how are you regrafting and how does that work? So that's part of the sustainability as well, is that, okay, are you putting back, because a lot of times they'll put back a slightly different grape or a different varietal.
Well, yeah. Now, especially, I'll give them a lot of credit in Europe. They're getting on board with, modified forms of, grapevines that are specifically bred for, what's next, for us in terms of climate and things like that. If you think about Merlot, it's been around 600-700 years. Right. Sauvignon Blanc's even longer than that. And, if you everything in nature is designed to evolve. Yeah. And, the Italian, there's a quasi-government entity in Italy that's done a lot of grapevine breeding, and, they've hybridized, they've got a Merlot Chronos and a Cabernet Sauvignon and something, but like these vines are much more cold tolerant, which they have less of an issue with there, but it makes them interesting for us. But more importantly, it's a vine you can spray 3 times a year. Just like the guy I was talking with at Cornell, one of the vines we grow is Chardonnay here, which is a cross between Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay. Yep. But it's a vine that you can spray 5 or 6 times a year. And he's saying, man, up here in Finger Lakes, these guys are spraying 12, 14 times a year. He said, I don't know why they're not growing this, because, again, it gets back to sustainability. How much of this you want to do?
Suddenly, it's a little bit better because you can reduce, the introduction.
And I think, look, that stuff's safe. I mean, otherwise it wouldn't be labeled. If you follow the label,
you're safe. Absolutely.
But I will say this: is just think about this: how much diesel fuel you're burning, and we all know we need to be burning less fossil fuels. And
exactly.
Like here, our tractors are all what we call Tier 4 compliant. Everybody that comes out here knows I've got the latest iron, that you can have, and that stuff is. It helps a lot, in fact, John Deere would tell you that the air coming out of my exhaust pipe is cleaner than the air going in your lungs if you were driving down the freeway in L.A.
I wouldn't doubt that, actually. I've driven freeways before, and it's pretty toxic.
But that still doesn't. It's still any combustion engines, puts off CO2, which is bad.
But just because we're in the country doesn't mean you can ride a 50-year-old tractor and have that puff of smoke over
all that soot and all that nitrous oxide, which is that big black. The engines we run just don't do that. And look, that's as an industry, we gotta everybody's got to get serious about.
Right.
And just being more efficient. How many fewer passes can we make with this stuff? Hey, and it's cheaper too, right? it's more cost effective.
Right.
But set aside the cost, is just like how much out there, how many passes you want to make.
Less hours on the equipment.
Yeah.
Less fuel.
That's right.
Less spraying, whatever you have to spray. And so, it's definitely cheaper. And that was what I brought up earlier. When people look at the farming industry, they don't realize, that farmers try and save money like everywhere. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons, or one of the ways you can do it, is that you can actually reduce what you're doing and the amount of, and by the way, it's actually less work to do that too.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
Even though you enjoy riding the tractor, it's also less work. So you don't have to be out there as many hours. So, you're conserving on 4 different planes.
That's right.
And that makes it definitely worthwhile. So the Chardonnay, and by the way, the Chardonnay is actually pretty good here, even though we're not drinking it right now, but it's a red day.
Gary wanted a red, so
it's a red day today for me. But people when they look at what goes into a vineyard, they don't realize how much effort that really is, and what you have to do, and how just something as simple as when you're talking about, like, for the Bordeaux region, for instance, in France, they have vineyards there that have been sustained for millennium, thousands of years. Okay, so how does that actually work? How do you sustain a vineyard for that long? And some of them are like 2 acres or a half an acre. They've got Jean-Jacques over here, if you'll allow me to say that, he's got like in back of his house, he's got a half an acre, but he might have 2 acres down the street. So they've literally gotten it blocked off by vineyard, and each vineyard means something different. And there's different labels for the different vineyards. And some, if you're from this city, or if you're from this farm from this city, or you're the Grand Cru from this farm from this city, those different things tell you what you can do, and the way you get there is how you sustain your vineyard. And so, it's important to realize that, there's a lot of work that goes into like a Grand Cru. When you have a wine that is the premier of all wines in that area, there's a level of effort and a level of work and a level of detail that is beyond all the rest. And that's how you get there. And that's the true sustainability, is that you're doing something that everyone else isn't doing. But it's great to hear what's going on here. The view is extraordinary. One of these days we'll have to actually broadcast out there.
I think it'd be fun.
Maybe next
maybe
summer we'll do that. Or spring, if we could have probably done it outside today, but we didn't. We could have had the vineyard as a background.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'll just take the video and put the background in there.
You're handy with stuff like that.
Or not. So we're going to be meeting again in 2 weeks. Yeah. Because we got postponed, and unfortunately it was me that did it. It was I had unfortunately in September I gotten COVID, so we had to postpone it. I wasn't quite ready yet, and that was my fault.
No, it's all good. We'll be looking forward to doing this again here in a couple of weeks.
But we'll do it again. What are we going to talk about again? Do you remember? We talked about doing a wine tasting, but I think we were going to reserve that for like January or February.
It'll be a surprise.
We're going to actually build the hype on that, right?
Build the hype. It'll be great.
All right. So are we good? Anything else we want to talk about?
I'm good, man. Thanks for coming out. It's always a pleasure hosting you here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for hosting us, and we want to talk to you guys. Thanks a lot, because we are JourneyMoreOften.today. We have 1723 vineyards in American Wine Journey. American Wine Journey actually has its own page on Facebook. So go check us out. Until the next time, 2 weeks, same time, same channel, same place. Yep. We'll be here, unless it's really, really nice outside.
We'll be out there.
And then we'll be out there. Maybe, we could get a good day, because it's only 61 degrees out there right now. So in, almost November, that's pretty good. But until then, enjoy life, journey more often. Thanks, everybody.
See ya.